Whoops, sorry, wrong game. There we go. Twilight Princess is one of the most fascinating Zelda games to look back on. It came into existence largely because Zelda fans were uncultured back then and didn't appreciate Wind Waker for the gorgeous masterpiece that it was. They wanted something edgier. So instead of making a direct sequel to that game as the Zelda team originally planned, they had to listen to the feedback even if it went against what they wanted to do. The state of the franchise depended on it after Wind Waker's disappointing sales and the equally disappointing performance of the GameCube. The new Zelda game needed to be big, bold, ambitious. It needed to excite audiences the same way that the Space World Tech demo did, which in itself was basically a more advanced and realistic looking version of the most beloved game in the series. And at E3 2004, to close out the conference, Nintendo treated the audience to one of the greatest and most hype reveals in video game history.
It's so beautiful.
This was it. This was exactly what the fans wanted. This was going to be the game that would surpass Ocarina of Time as the best Zelda game ever made. Except, it really didn't. I usually don't hear Twilight Princess talked about as fondly as other entries. Most people agree that it's good, but those same people may also say that it lacks its own identity, or that it has a slow opening, or that the whole Wolf Link mechanic isn't really their thing. This is the Zelda game that I've seen the most mixed reception towards, which is crazy to say because, did you hear that reaction? Twilight Princess may not be remembered as the masterpiece many hope for and wish for it to be, but I don't think that it gets enough credit, and I feel that it too often gets unfairly labeled as an Ocarina of Time clone. I have my own share of issues with the game, but I feel that the things Twilight Princess does well, notably how its more focused, linear structure leads to some of the greatest dungeons, set pieces, and moments in the series, deserve more love. This game has grown on me a lot, and after replaying it for this video, I believe that despite stumbling in a couple of areas, it is one of the franchise's greatest triumphs. This isn't Ocarina of Time 2. This is The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Like I said, the original plan was to create a direct sequel to Wind Waker for the GameCube, and while the idea of a Wind Waker follow-up was revisited for Phantom Hourglass in 2006, Aonuma begrudgingly knew that he and his team had to take a different approach if they wanted to restore the fans' faith in the franchise. And the most surefire way to do this was by taking heavy inspiration from Ocarina of Time and delivering what had been teased in that old GameCube tech demo, something that Miyamoto wasn't too keen on. Yeah, the guy who also didn't like Wind Waker's toon art style at first because he felt fans would want something more realistic, didn't want the new Zelda game to be more realistic. What do you want then? Everything about the first reveal feels so carefully designed to get the loudest possible reaction from the audience. The Conan the Barbarian music straight out of one of Ocarina of Time's most famous commercials, building up to a close-up shot of Link drawing his sword while riding Epona across ruined landscapes, followed by clips showing off the game's awesome combat and its darker, more mature graphics. This is how you reveal a video game. At this point, the game was still in the early stages of production. The reveal trailer was using Link's voice clips from Ocarina of Time, and even the Zelda logo at the end is ripped straight from that game. Truth be told, the Zelda team didn't have much of a clue yet of what direction they wanted to take the game in. The main thing they had written down was combat on horseback, and they couldn't just rely on the graphics and similarities to Ocarina of Time to carry the whole project. So, what did they come up with? Sure. At E3 2005, the game was fully playable for the first time, and Link's new wolf form was shown to the masses. An odd choice, no doubt, but nevertheless, there was a lot of excitement for the game, which was now given the name Twilight Princess. The plan was to release it that very year, but behind the scenes, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. There was a lot of pressure to make Twilight Princess as big of a hit as Ocarina of Time, both critically and financially, and with the GameCube entering its twilight years after the Wii was revealed that same E3, the last thing Nintendo wanted was to hurt the game's sales by releasing it on a console that was about to be replaced. The decision was made to delay the game by a full year, not only to refine it, but also to develop a Wii version in addition to the GameCube version, a strategy that to this day was one of Nintendo's best. Launching their new system with a brand new 3D Zelda, one that was already highly anticipated, was a genius move. Even if they couldn't have anticipated how much the Wii would blow up in popularity, even Nintendo systems that end up failing tend to sell pretty well in their first couple of months on the market, so this was still the right play. As a matter of fact, the Wii version came out first on November 19th, 2006 in North America, with the GameCube version releasing nearly a month later. This all culminated in what can only be described as a perfect storm. Twilight Princess sold incredibly well and it was reviewed incredibly well. Nintendo got the response they wanted, and everyone was happy. At least at first. Say it with me, as time went on, the fanbase's opinion on Twilight Princess shifted. The recency bias and excitement for a realistic Zelda game had worn off, and what fans were left with was a really weird Zelda game. Weird even for the series. A Zelda game with a huge world with not a lot to do in it and that you weren't even allowed to fully explore until about 8 to 10 hours in. Oh, and you won't even get to see this world until you complete the 3-hour intro. A Zelda game that's fun to play when you're actually slashing monsters with your sword, but you're not always doing that because of the new mechanic where Link does this. And a Zelda game with graphics that looked amazing for a couple of months at least before people started realizing that this art style wasn't going to hold up that well in a couple of years. The game was also really dark. Like in a literal sense, I can't see a f***ing thing in here. Simply put, Twilight Princess didn't end up being the game people were expecting. It didn't do enough to evolve the series in many people's eyes, and many of its design decisions became a little controversial. I don't think it ever got to the point where it was hated by the fanbase like Skyward Sword. Instead, Twilight Princess was stuck in this awkward limbo for a long time where it was seen as an entry that was just okay. Nothing great, nothing bad, but no real reason to prop it up as much as Ocarina, Majora, or even Wind Waker, the latter of which was finally starting to gain more positive recognition. When I got into the Zelda series, Twilight Princess was one of the last ones I played. I had been exposed to the game a bit beforehand through YouTube Let's Plays. A friend of mine had the game and even let me borrow it for a while, but I didn't get very far. I was focused on other games at the time. I bought the game for myself on the Wii a couple of months after getting Wind Waker, because Lord knows I was not going to be able to find a copy of the GameCube version. There are way more Wii copies out in the wild than GameCube copies. Just look at the difference in how much each version goes for on eBay. It's insane. The Wii version is how I first beat Twilight Princess, and I liked it. I thought it was good, but I definitely didn't like it as much as the games that came before it. I wasn't that big of a fan of Wolf Link or how barren the game felt, and the story didn't do much for me at the time. I never really replayed it either, or even had the desire to revisit it. Not until 2016. It only seemed logical after nearly every other 3D Zelda game had been remastered that Twilight Princess was the next in line to get the same treatment. And there were tons of rumors and leaks about Twilight Princess HD. Remember in 2015 when this new render of Link started circulating around the internet? It's Link in his iconic Twilight Princess pose, but this was completely new artwork, suggesting that Twilight Princess HD wasn't just real, it may also be getting a revamped art style. And that got me pretty excited. And when I remembered the gorgeous Wii U tech demo from 2011 which used Twilight Princess character designs, I got even more excited. Time really is just a circle, isn't it? During the November 2015 Nintendo Direct, the presentation opened up with Twilight Princess, and I was eager to see how the game would look in HD. They started off by showing footage from the GameCube version, and any second now it was gonna transition into the new visuals. I'm still waiting. The footage being shown was footage of Twilight Princess HD, and it took me way too long to realize this. I was pretty bummed out. Every other Zelda remake at the time looked drastically different from the originals. There was absolutely no confusion, and this was all doubly disappointing because unlike Wind Waker HD, which managed to get away with minimal graphical changes because of how well its visuals aged, Twilight Princess did not have that luxury. If the game wanted to pass off as a modern title, a lot of work was going to have to be done. It needed a total visual makeover, but it just seemed like Nintendo cheaped out and opted for a simple resolution bump instead, during a time when the company was cheaping out on a lot of things. It wasn't until I closely analyzed the HD version well after the game's release that I realized more work was put into this remaster than I initially gave it credit for. Textures are at a much higher quality now and don't look nearly as muddy as they did on the GameCube or Wii. The game looks way cleaner and way sharper than it did back in the day. If we're being technical, more work was probably put into Twilight Princess HD than Wind Waker HD. But then again, going back to what I said earlier, Wind Waker didn't need to be improved much to begin with. From a casual perspective, Twilight Princess on Wii U doesn't look as impressive. You need a magnifying glass to appreciate the upgrades, and in that sense, I can't help but call it a failure when putting it up against the other remasters from a visual standpoint. It also sold a lot worse than Wind Waker HD did, and I think that the underwhelming graphical enhancements had something to do with this. Heck, the main reasons I bought it when it came out were for the Wolf Link amiibo, and it was 2016 and I was a Nintendo fan. What the f else was I supposed to play? The GameCube is where you'll find Twilight Princess in its most basic form. The game plays and runs very well. This is the console it was designed for after all. Though interestingly, you only get 2 item slots in this version because Midna occupies the Z button, making this the 3D Zelda game with the least amount of item slots up to this point. Wii games are often criticized for forcing in pointless motion control gimmicks for the sake of having motion controls, and Twilight Princess is no different. In the Wii version, you swing the sword by shaking the Wii remote, but since the Wii remote by itself can't detect precise movements very well, shaking it just acts as a makeshift button press, so it's not as if you can swing the remote diagonally to do a diagonal slash. This type of accurate swordplay wouldn't be implemented until Skyward Sword, which required the Wii Motion Plus accessory. The combat in this version feels very unintuitive and straight up sluggish because of this. It doesn't feel very good to play at all nowadays. Frankly, I don't know how my younger self was able to tolerate it. There are some benefits to this control scheme, like the simplification of the spin attack, which can now be executed instantaneously by shaking the nunchuck. You technically have 4 item slots in this version, and the Wii Remote's pointer is now used for aiming, which I am always a fan of. But it just boggles my mind that Nintendo didn't at least give players the option to plug in a GameCube controller to play the game with a traditional control scheme. Like, man, there's 4 perfectly good holes right there. It also would have made this a definitive version between the two by default and made it more accessible for left-handed players, since the game is designed around the sword being in Link's right hand only. The team went as far as making Link right-handed for the first time in the most roundabout way possible, by mirroring the entire game. Everything is now flipped, and I kinda like this, if only because it's a quirk that only a company like Nintendo would have come up with. Why just change Link's character model when you can mirror everything and offer a slightly different experience from the other version? Mario Kart had already proved years before this that doing something as simple as mirroring level design can provide a fresh take on something familiar. But aside from this, the pointer controls and the 16:9 aspect ratio, Twilight Princess on Wii is not my preferred way to play the game. Now, Twilight Princess HD gives you the best of both worlds, as you can play the game in either orientation, except for one small caveat. Each version is locked to a respective difficulty setting. If you want to play the GameCube version, you have to play on normal mode, and if you want to play the Wii version, you have to play on hero mode. And there's no way around this, which is dumb. I'm sorry, but it's dumb. If there's one thing that gets on my nerves with remakes and remasters, it's a lack of options. It's not a huge deal, but it's something that's always bugged me. And you know what else bugs me? Amiibo. Not the figures themselves, but with how Nintendo integrates them into their games. Sometimes the things they unlock are pretty insignificant, and other times they act as a paywall for gameplay content I actually want to try out. Exhibit A. Scanning the Ganondorf amiibo makes you take double damage. You might be thinking, well, that's what hero mode does too, which is true, but even in hero mode, the Ganondorf amiibo can still be scanned, meaning you take quadruple damage, basically unlocking a secret superhero mode. I would have loved to try this out, or use this as a workaround of sorts to play a more difficult version of the GameCube version, but I don't have the amiibo. Exhibit B. The Wolf Link amiibo unlocks the Cave of Shadows, a modified version of the Cave of Ordeals dungeon from the base game that forces you to play as Wolf Link. Now, I'll talk about both of these dungeons later, but regardless of whether I think the Cave of Shadows is good or not, spoiler alert, I don't, this should not be locked behind an amiibo. Yes, the physical version of Twilight Princess HD came bundled with the Wolf Link amiibo, but what about people who got the game digitally, or used? They don't have the amiibo, hence they don't have access to the new dungeon, which was used as a selling point. It's even on the back of the box. Amiibo have always been super inconsistent with the type of content they unlock, a discussion for another day. And no, I don't consider these to be solutions. They're cheap, but they still cost money. At the very least, they're more readily available, so I'll at least give them that. So anyways, Twilight Princess HD is pretty great. Putting my nitpicks aside, this is the best way to officially play the game. It may not be as graphically different as many of us hope for it to be, an unfortunate reality that really shows the game's age, but it still looks really nice. Playing this on a big TV where you can properly notice and appreciate the higher quality textures is definitely the way to go. And if you go back and revisit the GameCube or Wii versions afterwards, you'll definitely notice just how much better the remaster looks. And aside from the quality of life updates you'd come to expect by this point, there aren't really any drastic changes to this version. It definitely plays it safe, and some may say that it only does the bare minimum, but seeing how every other Zelda remaster before this received backlash of varying degree for changing too much from the originals, I think this was the way to go. The things that are different are definitely for the better. Collecting rupees after loading a save file no longer acts as if you never collected one before. If your wallet is full when opening a chest with rupees, you collect them instead of putting them back in. When you unlock the ability to freely switch between Link's human and wolf forms, you can touch this button on the top right corner of the gamepad screen to instantly transform. A ghost lantern item was added to the game that lights up when you're near a Poe, which I don't find to be that useful since you have to be pretty damn close for it to work. Another change is the simplification of the Tears of Light sections, since you now only have to collect 12 instead of 16. Thing is, at least from what I've noticed, the Tears of Light that were removed were already relatively close to other tears that were kept in, so the total time you save is negligible, and it really makes me wonder why they even bothered with this and why a lot of people act like this makes the Twilight sections infinitely better. It makes little to no difference. And just like Wind Waker HD, Twilight Princess HD had Miiverse support in the form of stamps that you were able to share with others. These stamps can be found in chests in the game, replacing chests that used to contain rupees or something. Even though Miiverse is dead, it's still pretty cool having these to collect, as opposed to the Tingle bottle that became absolutely worthless after the server shut down. My playthrough of Twilight Princess HD is what made me start to appreciate the game a lot more. The Zelda game that I initially felt lukewarm towards was now the Zelda game that I considered to be better than Ocarina of Time. And frankly, I couldn't put the game down when I replayed it to record footage, so much so that I often forgot to write down notes after completing certain sections of the game. Even the story, which didn't really leave much of a lasting impression on me back then, has also grown on me. At least, most of it. Some aspects of the story that impressed me even on my first playthrough were its presentation and tone. The cutscenes in Twilight Princess are the most cinematic we've seen yet. They wanted this game to give the same vibes as an epic medieval Hollywood movie. In other words, the team was clearly trying to appeal to the Lord of the Rings crowd, since the movie trilogy had become synonymous with popular culture in the West at the time, and it definitely works. The story is filled with thrilling, exciting action set pieces and balances these well with plenty of moments of tension and sheer dread. This is one of the darkest Zelda games, right up there with Majora's Mask, a decision that was very much intentional to appeal to the fans who wanted a more mature and grown-up version of Zelda. It's why this is the only Zelda game to receive a T rating. See this? This ain't for kids. Twilight Princess's opening does a great job of tricking the player into letting their guard down, giving them a false sense of security to make the moment that everything goes to shit all the more shocking. You've gotten used to the calm and peace of the simple ranch life, seeing Link's routine of running errands, herding goats, and hanging out with the village children. But just when you think the game is about to let you go and find the real adventure, the adventure finds you in a very abrupt and brutal way. Link gets his skull shattered, Ilia gets shot in the back, holy f***. The kids get kidnapped and Link chases after them but ends up getting pulled into the Twilight Realm by a shadow beast. Oh, and he turns into a wolf. This whole sequence establishes just how messed up Hyrule has become. Twilight Princess isn't afraid to show characters beaten, afraid and fearing for their lives, tortured and on the brink of death. This is a world where not even children are safe. The villain this time is Zant, the self-proclaimed King of Twilight, and even putting aside how his quest to engulf the world in Twilight has consumed almost the entire kingdom, just seeing how Ordon Village has been impacted is more than enough initial motivation for Link and the player to want to stop him. Like Wind Waker, this game features a protagonist with a personal goal to fight for. As always, Link is the chosen hero, but above all else, he wants to protect his home and save the missing kids who look up to him and his childhood friend. Just look at the determination, the sheer anger in his eyes when King Bulbin holds Colin hostage after he returns to attack Kakariko Village. And just look at the way he smiles when he helps Ilia recover from her amnesia. I mean, Link does smile quite a few times in this game. At times I feel it may as well be his default facial expression. I like when there's more to Link's character than him simply being the one-note hero who heads out to save the world just because that's his job. Who else is gonna do it? You? Maybe you? I didn't think so. Link becomes much more interesting to me when he has a personal stake in the story. And the best part is that Twilight Princess doesn't just give us one relatable protagonist, it gives us two. Midna is just as much of a main character as Link. Hell, I'd argue she's even more important than him when the main plot and quest to stop Zant is concerned. At the end of the day, this is her story. Midna is like a much more fleshed out version of Tattle, a companion whose own motivations line up in some way with Link's, so they use him to their advantage to get what they want. But let's be real here, Midna is way more interesting than Tattle and is unquestionably the best companion character in any Zelda game. I love that she's initially selfish and super manipulative with how she persuades Link into helping her out. She doesn't really care about the children or the state of Hyrule, at least not at first.
Man, them kids, bro.
As someone whose home is the Twilight Realm, she welcomes the change of scenery and doesn't try to hide it. Even when you meet Zelda and she explains how Hyrule fell to Zant's power and the guilt she feels for not being able to do anything about it, Midna just teases her. She doesn't empathize with her or any of the cowering soldiers you find throughout the castle. And despite all of this, she still manages to be incredibly likable. Part of that is due to her quippy and sassy nature, but it's mostly because of her character growth. The more fused shadows you collect, which are basically the MacGuffin equivalent to to Ocarina of Time's spiritual stones, the more Midna starts revealing her true colors. She has a personal beef with Zant and refuses to accept him as her king, and as she spends more time with Link, she reveals that she wants the power of the fused shadows to be able to take him down and expose him for the false ruler he is. She even begins to show compassion for Zelda's situation and apologizes to Link for dragging him around everywhere. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really like Midna all that much at first. I thought she was kind of a bitch, but these small character moments in the latter half of the first third of the game started changing how I viewed her, to the point where after that scene where Linearity warns Link about misusing the power of the fused shadows, I started to worry for Midna and wondered if she'd be okay once she had them all, even fearing that she might become a villain worse than Zant if they overpowered her. And just like that, without even knowing it yet, I fell right into the trap that the writers had set up for me, because after obtaining the last fused shadow, Zant appears and f***s up. He overpowers Link and Midna and even Linearity. He takes the fused shadows for himself, curses Link, permanently trapping him in his wolf form, and leaves Midna in critical condition. There's a reason why this is widely regarded as one of the best sequences in the entire series. The sorrowful track, Midna's lament playing in the background, the sense of urgency, the curiosity to see where the story goes from here when all hope seems to be lost. It's perfect and incredibly emotional. And in an unexpected twist, Zelda uses all of her power to save Midna's life, sacrificing herself in the process. Twilight Princess had the nerve to kill off the title character, and it was done in a way that was in service of this story and these characters. It's at this point where Midna's attitude completely changes. The weight of Zelda's noble sacrifice now rests on her shoulders. This selfless act that saved her life now makes her determined to help Link save both realms, not just the Twilight Realm, from Zant's tyranny. After Link follows Zelda's advice and finds the Master Sword to break Zant's curse, turning him back into a human, the bond between him and Midna only gets stronger, and you feel that the two legitimately care about each other now as they start to develop a genuine friendship. Whereas before Midna was twisting Link's arm to convince him to help her accomplish her mission, she now asks him as a friend to help her find the Mirror of Twilight to reach Zant's hiding place. She also opens up to him more, telling him about the oppression that her people, the Twilly, faced under Zant's rule and how the shadow beasts they've been fighting are actually residents of the Twilight Realm, who have been transformed into monsters to serve as Zant's minions. You learn that she's been through a lot of pain, and you start gaining insight as to why she acted so distant when you first met her. Midna's arc is the strongest part of Twilight Princess's story, bar none, and her relationship with Link is really enjoyable to watch. This story is at its best when it's attempting to do something new, but unfortunately, it's not always doing something new. What I'm getting at is, I don't think Ganondorf should have been in the story. Bringing him in as the puppet master behind the scenes feels like such a cowardly thing to do. As if the writers thought fans wouldn't be content with having a new character as the main villain, so they resorted to shoehorning in another character who has no real business being here. Cause unlike Wind Waker, which feels like a natural conclusion to Ganondorf's story, and made his motivations in that game a core part of the story's messages and themes, Ganondorf in Twilight Princess feels like he was written in at the last minute. And because he's here, Zant has to be cast aside, so we can get another climax with Link versus Ganondorf, but with realistic graphics this time. And don't get me wrong, this is a cool fight, if a little too easy, but it doesn't carry the same weight that Wind Waker's final boss did for me, aside from making me think that he killed Midna. Boy was I pissed when I saw this the first time, but I would have had the same emotional response, maybe even a stronger response, if it was Zant holding up her helmet instead. He already filled the role of the despicable villain perfectly, even more when you find out that Midna was the true ruler of the Twilight Realm before Zant usurped the throne and turned her into an imp. That's it, you're going on the list. Zant should have been the main villain, not Ganondorf. But nothing feels like more of a cop-out than when Zelda comes back for no reason, completely undoing and undermining her sacrifice. And it's not like she does anything important to warrant this. Oh, she gives Link the light arrows? That's why we went back on one of the boldest and most impactful narrative decisions in the series? So we can have a fight on horseback with Ganondorf that sucks because the horseback combat in this game is dog shit? No, the real reason is because now the finale is like Ocarina of Time, because people respond to nostalgia, checking boxes for the sake of checking boxes. I'm probably overreacting more than I should here. I just find it so disappointing that there was all this setup for a unique story that the franchise hadn't done before, just for it to devolve into a retread of something we've already seen, all for a janky looking final blow animation. Well done, guys. Everything else I'm a real fan of, barring some busy work here and there that does feel like padding, like the whole quest involving Ilya's recovery to give one example. But Twilight Princess has some of the best moments, characters, and twists in the series, even if some of the twists get undone by the end. And it's not like I hate all the fan service. I really liked the return of the Temple of Time and how it's used as a conduit between the present era and the era of the Hero of Time. And speaking of the Hero of Time, making him the hero's shade who passes on his wisdom and skills to the hero of Twilight was a brilliant idea and a great way to connect the two games. And Midna reverting to her original form at the end but remaining the same snarky friend I'd come to care for on the inside always puts a smile on my face. The way her arc comes to a close also really resonates with me, as she understands her responsibility to keep the realms of light and twilight separate and destroys the only thing connecting the two, knowing she may never be able to see her newfound friends again. She's left behind her selfish ways and self-destructive quest for revenge, and has learned to use her power not for conquest like Zant did, but to keep her home and Link's home safe. But the main reason I've come to love Twilight Princess so much is its gameplay. But before that, let's talk about the intro. Coming from somebody who defended the first hour of Majora's Mask, I can't do the same for Twilight Princess. And a big difference right off the bat is that this opening isn't just an hour long. It's closer to 2, maybe 3 hours if you count how long it takes to get to the first temple after starting a new game. In between that time, it's a lot of cutscenes, rupee collecting, some combat here and there, and the first Wolf-Link section, which has its own merits, mind you. I don't dislike Wolf-Link anymore, but it goes on for quite a bit and isn't as fun as the taste of gameplay you had earlier as a human. And if you want to take it a step further, when you finish the Forest Temple and enter Hyrule Field, it doesn't take long until you have to return to the Twilight Realm, which means another Wolf-Link section to get through to open up another chunk of the world. For most first-time players, from the beginning of the game to the end of the second Wolf-Link segment, I estimate they're going to spend about 3 to 4 hours of that time not controlling human Link with his sword. That's a lot of time to ask the player to invest, especially if they're not having fun the entire time. The game gets a lot better after this first chunk and continues to get incrementally better from here on out, but that's not really a positive, is it? Just wait a couple of hours and then you'll get to the good stuff? Majora's Mask and Skyward Sword are the other 3D Zeldas that have received the same criticism, the bad first impression. But Twilight Princess is definitely the worst of the 3. And this is coming from someone who loves Majora's opening and likes Skyward Swords. Goat herding isn't fun and not much changes the second time around. Sneaking around as Wolf Link isn't that exciting. And while I like seeing the peaceful life that this version of Link has, when I replay the game, I just want to skip past this stuff. And the initial mystery and intrigue I felt the first time exploring the Twilight Realm just isn't there anymore. It's not a good thing when the first couple of hours of a game are the worst part about it. But at the same time, this means that it only gets better from here, and I really mean it. A big issue with the intro is that you're forced into a specific sequence of events with little to no opportunity to deviate from the path that has been laid out for you. You're not given a lot of freedom, and to an extent, this holds true even when you get past the intro. Twilight Princess is a lot more linear than its predecessors. To access new areas and progress the story, it's no longer just about having the right item. Accessing, say, the Goron Mines isn't as simple as just passing through Kakariko Village and Death Mountain to get there. You have to dispel the Twilight in the Elden region first, then attempt to climb Death Mountain and fail, then go back to Oradon Village to get the Iron Boots from the mayor to be able to stand your ground against the Gorons, a mission that involves a sweaty wrestling match, by the way. And if that wasn't enough, returning to Kakariko Village triggers the fight against King Bulbin that leads to the showdown on the Bridge of Elden. Previous Zelda games also had certain events that needed to be triggered to reach the next plot important area, but this type of progression is 10 times more prominent in Twilight Princess. From what I've gathered, a lot of people consider this a flaw, while I consider it a boon that enhances this particular Zelda game. The linearity provides the opportunity to have exciting, scripted set pieces to look forward to, such as the aforementioned battle on the Bridge of Elden. But there's also storming the enemy base in Gerudo Desert, defending this carriage as it makes its way to Kakariko Village, and snowboarding down a mountain Sonic Adventure style, just to give a couple more examples. There's this added sense of importance to everything you do, because these moments of gameplay naturally push the story forward. Diving for rupees to get a scale feels sort of random by comparison, whereas the quest to get the Zora armor feels more organic, or completing a set of trials to open the way to the Master Sword, even if this part makes me want to tear my hair out. Yeah, there are exceptions, exceptions of course, but even these exceptions can still manage to be fun. Like, I still think that helping Ilya gain her memory back is blatant padding, but if there's a silver lining to this quest, it's the hidden village where you use your bow to clear out the entire area from the bokoblin infestation, and completing this unlocks a quest where you have to comb the village from top to bottom to find 20 cats. What's not to love about that? The linear structure may not work that well for some during the intro since the tasks you're asked to do are relatively mundane, but this is not the case for the rest of the game. Twilight Princess is super fun to play and brilliantly designed. It's constantly throwing new ideas at you or bringing back old ideas with an added gimmick, which is why I can't take people who label it as nothing more than an Ocarina of Time clone seriously. Yes, I poked fun at how similar the two are at the beginning of the video, but it was all in good fun. There seems to be this vitriol against linear games that I just don't understand. There are benefits to more open-ended games, but let's not pretend like something more scripted doesn't have its own set of benefits. Linear games aren't objectively worse than non-linear ones, just like how 2D games aren't objectively worse than 3D ones, or how turn-based RPGs aren't objectively worse than action RPGs. They're just differently designed games, and we should be focusing more on whether a game succeeds at pulling off what it wants to be, rather than bashing it for not being something else. I understand if fans wanted this series to evolve by this point and try something new. It's okay to have preferences. It's okay if you prefer games that offer more freedom. But to write linear games like Twilight Princess off as glorified hallway simulators when that's far from being true is childish. I'm not gonna act like I'm not guilty of having this mindset at one point, but I accept that I used to be quite ignorant and have opened my mind up since then, and I've been able to enjoy lots of games way more because of it. A linear game may sacrifice a rich open world, but because of that, it can refine and polish other areas. In Twilight Princess, I enjoy the lead-ups to dungeons almost as much as the dungeons themselves at times. And yeah, I wouldn't say its world is packed with things to discover, but there's still a respectable amount of secrets to find. Hyrule Field rewards players with a keen eye and a good memory. For instance, you may come across these suspicious rails along the walls and not know what to make of them at first, but keep them in the back of your mind and you may be compensated with a valuable heart piece when you get the spinner and remember to come back. And certain side quests like collecting golden bugs for Agatha or hunting Poes to break Tony's curse fill Hyrule Field with even more stuff to look for. And even though this world probably didn't need to be as big as it is considering how much empty space there is, it is so exhilarating riding across the fields with Epona. The burst of speed you get when you dash with her feels so satisfying. Traversing Hyrule Field has never been this thrilling. And of all the pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda games, this is probably the one I'd be the most likely to boot up just to ride around the world for a while. And I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but this is the best overworld theme in the series, and it really helps sell the epicness of the adventure. This game also has the most mechanically interesting combat yet. If I can get one nitpick out of the way first, there is a noticeable bit of input delay here. Wind Waker's combat definitely feels more responsive in this regard, but that's really the only problem I have because the gameplay is so flashy and visceral otherwise, and it feels so good. This Link may be a happy boy, but he can also be an angry boy. You can really feel the power that he puts into each one of his sword swings. The jump attack and spin attack feel especially awesome this time around, and every connecting hit makes the action pause for a fraction of a second, and it really helps sell the impact of each blow. And while they got rid of the parry from Wind Waker, Twilight Princess introduces hidden skills you can learn by activating these Howling Stones in your wolf form, allowing you to meet with the hero's shade who will teach you a new ability. The ending blow looks dope as hell and solves one of the problems I had in Wind Waker, where you were forced to wait for enemies to get up after being knocked down to continue hitting them. With this, the pacing of the combat is improved quite a bit. The shield attack can be used to render an enemy defenseless, the Helm Splitter lets you follow up a shield attack with an overhead slash, the back slice lets you roll behind an enemy quickly to attack them where they're more exposed, the Mortal Draw is a powerful but risky move that can only be executed when your sword is sheathed, and the Jump Strike and Great Spin are much more powerful versions of the jump and spin attacks respectively. Twilight Princess gives you control of a very competent Link. His raw strength is probably thanks to wrestling goats and shit all day. I always like to use Dark Nuts or a similar type of enemy as a benchmark to judge how much I enjoy the combat in these games. And even during my first playthrough, I was just waiting for the moment when one would appear. Because my earliest memory of Twilight Princess is actually seeing this piece of key art in a Game Informer magazine, and it's one of my favorite pieces of key art of all time. It really conveys the viciousness of the game's combat, and when I did finally fight a Darknut, I was not disappointed. Fighting 3 of them at the same time is a little overkill, I will admit, but one-on-one encounters make for really memorable fights. And I also want to praise Link's voice actor this time around, Akira Sasanuma, for the energy he puts into his performance. If the combat has a sour spot, it's definitely mounted combat, which is a shame because if done right, it could have resulted in some fun fights, and I may have actually gone out of my way to fight enemies while riding Epona. But for how much it was featured in promotional material, it really isn't given a lot of attention in the final game. When you are forced to use it, it doesn't feel very smooth. Getting close enough to enemies to slash them is an awkward struggle. I find myself spending more time running into things than actually fighting because paying attention to where I'm going isn't the easiest thing to do when my attention is already on the half a dozen enemies trying to kill me. The good thing is that mounted combat makes up only a small fraction of the game, and it's totally optional outside of very few scripted moments. There is one other side to the combat I've been neglecting, but to talk about that, we need to talk about the Twilight. Zelda is no stranger to the concept of dual worlds, exploring a location you've already been in again but with an added twist. In Twilight Princess, this idea returns in the form of the Twilight Realm. The atmosphere while you're in here is second to none. This game is characterized by its brown and orange color palette. Sunsets in this game look beautiful, and I love how the world gets briefly colored in this orange glow. But in the Twilight, you have this bright gold hue that illuminates the environment. The skies have this almost blinding glow to them that contrasts gorgeously with the black clouds and twilight particles rising from the ground all around you. The music is different from anything I've heard in any other Zelda game, and it fits perfectly. Twilight is like a mesh of the best aspects of previous dual world mechanics to create something that is uniquely unsettling and unwelcoming, staying true to the game's darker tone. Like the future time period in Ocarina of Time, you get to explore a bleak version of Hyrule. Shadow beasts roam the land, forcing people to take shelter, and not even the Hyrule Castle guards are able to fend them off, though something tells me they were never that great at their jobs to begin with. In another Ocarina of Time callback, the waters of Zora's domain are frozen, cutting off the waterfalls that the Zoras used to travel between the domain and the rest of Hyrule. But unlike that game where you were merely told that most of the Zoras were trapped beneath the ice, you see it firsthand here, and it is deeply unnerving. The Linearity Twilight segment, despite me thinking it overstays its welcome just a bit, also contains one of my favorite side stories in the game, where you help put the spirit of the late Zora Queen Rutella to rest by fulfilling her request to save her son Rallis, who she had sent to warn Zelda about Zan's invasion. Unfortunately, he fell ill before he could make it from being away from water for too long. The heartbreaking thing about all of this is that Rallis has to learn about his mom's death after he regains consciousness. At least this side story does have a happy ending, and you do save the Zoras and everyone else trapped in the Twilight by collecting the Tears of Light, bringing light back to each region. To accomplish this, you have to search for the tears in these unfamiliar places while occupying an unfamiliar body. And this is my favorite thing about exploring the Twilight Realm, how it forces you to approach these environments in a different way given your new limitations and abilities as Wolf Link. The Tears of Light are all marked on your map. The challenge comes from how to get to some of them, seeing as there's certain things you can't do as a wolf. You can't use ladders or vines to climb to a higher ledge, but you can jump really far to make it to the top instead with Midna's help. Using your animal senses, you may find a spot to dig your way into a building since you can't open doors, or another animal to talk to who may give you some helpful advice. Link isn't as versatile as a wolf, but with Midna's help, you can create this field of dark energy around you, allowing you to quickly lunge at and kill any enemy trapped within it. Wolf Link certainly isn't as exciting to play as compared to Human Link, and after you've gotten rid of all of the Twilight, outside of a couple of dungeons that take advantage of his abilities, there isn't much of a reason to use Wolf Link in the later parts of the game, but I definitely wouldn't say that he's a bad addition, and he still gets his moments to shine here and there, since you need to use the sense ability to defeat Poes around the world, and there's plenty of digging spots around the field that lead to collectibles hidden underground. Speaking of the world, that's something I want to talk more about, specifically the things there are to do in the world, or rather rather the lack thereof. Probably because of the game's more linear nature, there's a noticeable drop in side quest variety, and there aren't too many to begin with, and even the ones I find fun to complete have a few annoying things about them. The hunt for Poe souls is similar to the Gold Skulltula side quest from Ocarina of Time, to the point where, just like the spiders, Poes that are outdoors only spawn at night. But Twilight Princess is the only 3D Zelda game where you can't change the time of day. There's no special Song of Time or even a bed to sleep in, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen a Poe off in the distance and just barely missed it because the sun starts to rise, meaning I have to wait till nightfall to kill it. The other collectathon type side quest is Agatha's bug hunt. I don't really have an issue with how difficult it can be spotting some bugs. That was very much the point, and you can always wait until nighttime to make the search easier. But the only rewards you get from this quest are wallet upgrades and a bunch of rupees. Rupees are also your reward for collecting the Poe souls. Other than Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess may be the game where rupees are the least useful. The biggest money investment in this game is the Mallow Mart side quest, where you help the spawn of Satan open up his own shop in Castletown to drive out the greedy vendors trying to bleed the residents dry with their high prices. I appreciate the consumer-friendly mission, but I have to ask, who the hell taught this kid how to become a successful businessman? The big item you're able to purchase once you fund Mallow Mart's grand opening is the magic armor, which is nowhere near as good as it was in the last game. I still find this quest worth doing though, if only to give Castletown another place of interest, because without it, this place is pretty dull. There's Telma's bar that becomes a base of sorts for a resistance group that helps you out in the later half of the game, and among them is Russell from Ordon Village, which is pretty cool. There's a minigame you can play in town testing how good you are at using your claw shots and bow. There's a fortune teller who I completely forgot about until I started writing this video, so I never got any footage of her. And even though the place looks busy, it never feels busy, if that makes any sense. More side quests would have really livened up the place, or at the very least more named NPCs, because there aren't a lot of them, and the ones you do meet are kind of forgettable even with their flamboyant character designs. Either that or they're flat out creepy like Uka here. Thanks for letting me leave dungeons whenever I want, but I don't want to look at you. There are a handful of enjoyable minigames at the very least, and I like pretty much all of them. Even fishing, which is way more simplified, so it's actually a relaxing pastime now, instead of something that makes me want to throw my controller against the wall. I really love the boat ride through the rapids in Zora's River, and flying through the canyons in Lake Hylia to pop balloons for points. Snowboarding is definitely my favorite, and the race against Yetta is actually quite hard. You can't afford to make any mistakes here. There's also the Cave of Ordeals, which is pretty much like the Savage Labyrinth, though I feel like this one is a lot more difficult. The Cave of Shadows is the same deal, but you're stuck as Wolfling for the whole thing. And oh boy, some of these enemies were clearly not designed to be taken on as a wolf. This just doesn't feel very balanced, and the only way I've been able to reach the end is by scanning the Zelda amiibo to refill my hearts. I also don't like that the game makes you do the first 5 floors, then the first 15 floors, and then all 40. Yeah, the dungeon is divided into 3 tiers, and each tier makes you start from the beginning. And for your troubles, you get the Colossal Wallet, assuming you have all the other wallet upgrades. It holds 9,999 rupees, but say it with me, this reward is lame as hell. You can't even do all 40 floors until you reach the Palace of Twilight, so I have to ask, what are you going to be using rupees for this late in the game? At least this means you're not losing much if you don't have the Wolflink amiibo, other than a good night's sleep if you're a hardcore completionist. Twilight Princess may not have the best side content, but that's okay. The game makes up for it in other key areas. One of those being possibly the best part of the game, and the first thing I always point to when I defend it, the dungeons. The dungeons are excellent. With every 3D Zelda game fresh in my mind now, it is more clear to me than ever that Twilight Princess has the best dungeons out of all of them. Like, you know how good the Forest Temple, Stone Tower Temple, and the Ancient Cistern are? That's like every dungeon in Twilight Princess in terms of quality. The items you get in these dungeons may be virtually useless outside of them, yet another consequence of the game's linear design, but the items in this game shine in ways they never have before. Their potential is used to their fullest in their respective dungeons, and the creative ways in which you use them go beyond what's been done in the past. Without these items, these dungeons wouldn't be half as fun as they are. Most of these are worthy contenders for the best dungeons in the entire franchise. The worst ones are the first 2, but even these are still pretty good. It's like saying Metroid Prime 3 isn't as good as 1 or 2. The Forest Temple is a great starting dungeon. It eases you into how a lot of the game's dungeons are designed, by using the monkeys as an in-game guide, nudging you you towards where you need to go. And the second half opens the dungeon up more once you unlock the Gale Boomerang. On top of being able to lock onto multiple targets like in Wind Waker, a magic gust of wind follows the boomerang wherever it goes now, and the puzzles you're required to solve with it make it feel like a combination of Wind Waker's boomerang and the Deku Leaf. One of my favorite puzzles requires you to figure out that you can lock onto a bomb followed by something else to send the boomerang on a path where it carries the bomb to the second thing you locked onto. It can be an enemy or a breakable boulder you couldn't normally reach. The Goron mines are about as good as the Forest Temple, only brought down a peg because of its slower pacing. You use the iron boots to magnetize onto certain walls and ceilings, but you move at a snail's pace when you do so. It's also a pretty simple dungeon overall, but that doesn't mean I don't like it. It's a fire temple with a creative setting, an industrial mine with lots of metal architecture, and I really dig the heat wave effect. It really shows just how hot it must be in here. And when Link falls in lava in this game, it's pretty brutal. The Lakebed Temple is like if the Water Temple and Great Bay Temple had a baby, which to some may be a terrifying concept, but as someone who doesn't hate those two dungeons and even adores the second one, it's no wonder why I love this dungeon so much. It feels just as intricately complex as the previous two, borrowing ideas from both but still managing to have its own identity. There are several levels like Ocarina's Water Temple, and you're in charge of changing where the water flows to affect different rooms in the dungeon, kind of like the Great Bay Temple. I like how often you have to inspect your surroundings for claw shot points to launch yourself towards, and stalactites you have to bring down with your bomb arrows to create platforms. Yeah, bomb arrows are a thing in this game. They're pretty great, though I wish the process of switching between bomb arrows and regular arrows was a bit snappier. And as you might expect, a lot of the dungeon requires you to go underwater, which the Goron mines already gave you a bit of a taste of. Unlike Ocarina of Time though, not only can you swing your sword underwater and even use bombs thanks to a new variant introduced in this game known as water bombs, but you can swim if you have the Zora armor equipped, and it feels really nice. Zora swimming is still better though, not that one. The Arbiter's Grounds is a fan favorite, and for good reason. I love horror elements in Zelda games, and this dungeon delivers in that respect to great effect. Your first goal is to chase down these 4 Poes, yet another homage to Ocarina of Time. The enemies you fight range from undead warriors to the returning Gibdos, and every now and then you may find yourself feeling a little heavier. If you turn into a wolf and turn on your senses, "How dare Neptune get off of me!" But this dungeon starts getting really fun once you get the spinner, one of my all-time favorite Zelda items. Look at this, even just watching gameplay of it speaks for itself. The Snow Peak Ruins automatically stands out for telling a story as you progress through it. This is actually the home of a Yeti couple, Yeto and Yetta, and your main goal here is to explore the dungeon to find ingredients for Yeto to use in a warm soup he's making for his sick wife. Once she gets better, she helps you locate the key to her bedroom, which is where she's keeping a shard of the Mirror of Twilight. Well, that wasn't too bad. Jesus Christ, that's a good jump scare, I'm not gonna lie. And when you snap Yetta out of her fit of rage with a good old whack with a 200-pound ball and chain, the reunion between her and her husband is so adorable. I love these two, and they make some damn good soup. The ball and chain item you get in this dungeon is used to break the large chunks of ice blocking the way to important rooms in the mansion. You'll also use it against the various enemies you'll encounter who are completely made of ice, and to hit these chandeliers to turn them into swinging platforms you can jump across. In one of my favorite parts, you have to shoot a cannonball into a specific room to shoot it out of a different cannon that's aimed at a chunk of ice you have to get rid of. This dungeon also has possibly the hardest block pushing puzzle in the series. The solution wasn't immediately obvious to me, and I liked that. It forced me to do a bit of forward thinking, and you can find block puzzles even harder than this one in a cave in Hyrule Field. The Temple of Time is a great example of how a more linear dungeon isn't automatically worse than a non-linear one. To put it very simply, it boils down to going in a straight line one way and then going back the opposite way to bring this statue to the central room. But every room along the path presents you with a new obstacle to overcome, and it's really fun solving them to reach the next room. Some rooms are more puzzle focused and others are more combat focused. I also love the ambience of this dungeon. Something about it feels so lonely, and I think it has to do with the fact that it's a temple from a bygone era, one where pretty much everybody who lived during it is now dead. I don't know, something about this place always gives me chills. You won't be lonely the whole time though, because the Dominion Rod lets you make companions out of these statues. The statues follow your every movement, and you have to use them to press down on switches, or in the big statue's case, use its hammer to break these gates, and figure out how to guide it to these designated spots that transport it to the next room as you make your way back to the entrance with it. Just try not to bonk yourself on the head. The city in the sky is massive. Oh Jesus, there's more of them. The claw shot you got from the Lakebed Temple gets even better when you find the double claw shots, and using them to scale this city really puts into perspective just how huge it is. I love when Zelda dungeons aren't the typical temple affair, you know? I much prefer when they seem like locations that fit naturally within the world and are simply designed as a traditional dungeon. You really get the sense that a whole civilization lives here. The technology here is way more advanced than what you find on the surface, and it all comes together to create a truly magnificent place. And the way you have to navigate it by claw-shotting all over the place adds this feeling of disorientation that I'd come to expect from being thousands of feet in the air, in a city that is in desperate need of maintenance. I'm afraid of heights. But putting my phobia aside, this is another excellent dungeon and easily one of my favorites. Finally, there's the Palace of Twilight and Hyrule Castle. They're not exactly conventional dungeons per se, though they still largely share the same excellent design philosophy, where each room is a test of your wits and strength and how fast you can run from this creepy ass hand that won't leave you alone. The outside of the Palace of Twilight is just look at it. This area proves that there's a certain beauty to the Twilight that you can't help but admire. And Link making his way up to the throne room in Hyrule Castle is one of the most intense build-ups to a climax in any Zelda game. The atmosphere here, elevated by Ganon's theme and the stormy backdrop once you arrive at the top of the castle, never fails to give me goosebumps. Twilight Princess is an absolute spectacle, and the dungeons are emblematic of this. And spectacular dungeons need spectacular boss fights. I like just about every one of these. Even the easier ones aren't as easy as, say, the worst of Wind Waker's pushover boss fights. These bosses are imposing as hell, and a lot of the wow factor comes from how this tiny lad manages to defeat these giant monsters with nothing but a sword and maybe a Beyblade if the situation calls for it. Just look at this. This shit is cool as f. They really nailed the bosses this time around. And with how many of these bosses are hundreds of times your size, it makes the more grounded bosses feel that much more special, which is why my feelings about him being in the story aside, fights like the final battle against Ganondorf are incredibly memorable. I understand if Twilight Princess isn't everyone's cup of tea. Despite me arguing how the greater emphasis on scripted, linear gameplay puts it a step above other Zelda games in many respects to me, I know not everyone agrees, and videos like these definitely won't change their mind. But I'm not trying to convince anyone to love the game. Like I said earlier, everyone has their own preferences. Everyone has their own opinion on what their ideal version of Zelda is. But just take it from me, someone who wasn't all too crazy about this game when I first played it. If you're even slightly curious about whether you might find something to enjoy about Twilight Princess now, I encourage you to give it another shot. Because when I took the time to gain a better understanding of why it's designed the way it is, and how refreshing and unique it is despite how much it borrows from Ocarina of Time, I realized just how underrated the game truly is. I still like this game more than Ocarina of Time. I like this version of Link, this version of Hyrule, the story, and I love how the game embraced the reaction it got when it was first revealed. It is chock full of similarly exciting and hype moments. It's an adventure worthy of the name. Twilight Princess is a triumph and reminder that Zelda can take on many forms, but on the inside, it's still the same series we've come to know and love. Thanks for watching.